knowing about the truth that God can do a lot of different things, but that he cares about each and every one of us, goes right along with what I wanted to talk about this morning, and that is the fact that each and every one of us can have a significant spiritual influence on our family and on our friends. I'm going to be speaking this morning from Genesis chapter number 48, beginning at verse number 8. On Genesis chapter number 48, I will begin at verse number 8. But first, I wanted to tell you a story. I wanted to tell you a story about a mother named Sue. Sue had a problem. She had a babysitter who she called Mrs. H. Mrs. H was very reliable and helpful, but she was a bit too lenient. Sue's mother had been strict and ran a tight ship, but Mrs. H allowed her son to play with, do you remember those old adding machines where you punch it in and it spit the paper out, and you hit the enter and you just keep spitting it all out? I always remember that was whenever I was at my grandparents' house, I would occasionally get to punch around on that and do that, and that was just something that was kind of fun. Or maybe if you were able to get a piece of paper and fill it up with staples, and that's what Mrs. H would do. Would always, whenever Sue sent her children with Mrs. H would allow them to get the staple and just staple away on the piece of paper, just filling it up with staples. Sue's mother had been a member of what she called the diet police, and she always said, no, you're going to do it just like this. You're not playing with your food. This is the food you're eating. No sugar, no candy. You eat your vegetables. You do this. But Mrs. H would allow her little boy to say, well, you don't want that. You can have a hot dog for breakfast. That's no problem. You don't want to have eggs. That's all right. You just go over here and we'll get you a can of baked beans or something. But that wasn't the way Sue's mom did things. Sue's mom had always read poetry or children's classics. But Mrs. H said, you can read whatever you want. If it's a car advertisement, tractor, motor oil, or maybe it's battery ads, you just enjoy just reading away. And Sue said, I really do have to wonder if this isn't bad for our problem for the child, and I don't know that I always feel comfortable doing this. But with no one to compare the babysitter to but her mother, she was just a little confused, because the problem was that Sue's mother, that is the babysitter, and Mrs. H were the exact same person. The only thing that had changed was time. That mother that had been shipshape and keep it all just so and no candy, no sugar, what had changed over time? Well, nothing but time. It was still the same person. The only thing that changed was all the rules. And so today is Grandparents' Day, and grandparents can have a significant influence in their children's lives, their children's lives, but it's not exclusive to grandparents. Each and every one of us, to anyone who has or had grandparents, there's something for each of us. And that is that your life and your testimony matters. It matters what you do, what you say, and the life you live. We may not always be aware of the things and the impact and the influence that each and every one of us have, but it does matter. We have a very special ability as people to be able to pass our faith on to other individuals. Does that mean that we can make decisions for our children or for our grandchildren or for our brothers, our sisters, our aunts, our uncles? No. But we can give them a desire and a passion to have what we have. The passage we're going to be reading in Genesis chapter number 48 is about a grandfather giving a blessing to his grandchildren. Jacob, or Israel, as he was renamed, is meeting his son Joseph and his children, speaking on this, passing on a blessing. In verse number 8, when Israel saw Joseph's son, he said, "Who are these?" Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons whom God has given me here." And he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your offspring also." Then Joseph removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys, and in them let my name be carried on, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. When we look at this passage, we immediately will have a couple of things run through our heads. Well, I can't do exactly what Jacob did. I can't do that. Well, that's okay. Jacob was promised that he would be a great nation, that his family would inhabit the promised land. When we pass a blessing onto someone, we don't pass our salvation onto them, but we do touch our families, our relatives, our family, our friends in a very special way. We have a unique influence that is only for us, that we can then pass on and be a blessing to everyone else. So let's look at this scripture and observe how that can be done. Well, we're going to back up and look a little bit before this passage and say, before you can pass on a blessing, you first of all have to have it to pass on. You must have something to be able to give something. We can only give what we have. Having good wishes, it really isn't enough. Remember the passage in the New Testament where Peter and John says, whatever I have, that's what I'm going to give to you. Says, I don't have silver and gold, but what I do have, I will give to you. So he couldn't pass on silver and gold because they didn't have it. But they healed the man, rise up, walk. Paul wrote to Timothy that the faith he had was first in his grandmother and then his mother. And we look at Jacob. Earlier in Genesis, we see that he received a blessing from his father. In Genesis 27, we see that in Genesis 32 that he received a divine blessing. We see that he wrestled with the Lord and his name was changed, indicating his nature had changed. His walk was changed, quite literally. Both literally, he walked with a limp because of his hip, but also he walked spiritually different. God had appeared to him. He had blessed him. He was promised God's favor, and he was promised that God would make him a great nation. It was a life-changing event when he wrestled with God. He was given a blessing. And from that, he was able to give it on to his grandchildren, what he had received from God. If he had no blessing that God had given him, how could he bless them and say, let them grow, let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth? How could that happen if God had not given that blessing but first to him? So, I don't believe that God has appeared to you in a dream and had you wrestle him where he's dislocated your hip and then changed your name, but God has given you something special. So what is it that you have to pass on? What is it that you have to pass down the line? Whether you do something in a tangible sense, a family Bible or a baptismal certificate or a tradition of some sort, these themselves are not sufficient for the demands of life. My mother has they called it, I'm trying to remember now, a nursery roll certificate, I believe it was, from my great-great-grandmother Elsie when now I remember my grandmother or grandfather because they both had very interesting names and I always would get them confused. But they have that hanging up in the hallway at my parents' house. And it is something to look on and it is something to commemorate the time when that individual was dedicated. It is something of significance to pass down through generations. But in all reality, what does that stand for? What does it mean? Well, it means that at a point in time they were dedicated. But how does that impact my parents' life or my grandparents' life or my great-grandparents' life? The impact that it had was not tangible because the paper itself does not hold the significance, but everything that it stands for. If you want to give somebody something of substance, it cannot be merely nicely bundled up in simply a book or a piece of paper. It has to have something experiential to go along with it. In the same way that we can read our Bible and we can have all of the head knowledge there is to have, but if we have not personally experienced a relationship with Christ, then all of that is for naught. It's all worthless. It's all empty. It's all vain. It means nothing but words written on a piece of paper. It's the experience that transforms. You must know God for yourself to experience His transforming power. My great-grandparents had to experience Christ in their own lives so that then they might be able to get that and to pass it on to my grandparents, so that it might be passed to my parents, so then I might receive it myself. You must have a personal experience of salvation. A family Bible is invaluable. Let it never be said that it's worthless or meaningless. A certificate of a baptismal certificate or something of that nature, or a tradition that is regularly occurring that has to do with scriptural matters, it's not meaningless or worthless, but unless there's an experience of a personal experience to go along with it, its value is lost. My great-grandparents once talked about the time that they were saved at Clinton Camp, because they understood when they became Christians that they couldn't just know about it. That was the part that changed, because they said, well, we grew up in a Christian home. We knew about Christ. We knew about the Bible. But at that time in that camp meeting, they realized something has to be different for me. I believe it all. I think it all sounds good. But have I been saved? Have I personally experienced what it means to be a Christian? To believe in the Christian way is not enough. You must know what it is to be a Christian. And only then can you pass it on to others? Because again, as we're talking here, what is it that you have to have before you can give it to somebody else? You have to have something. You have to have what it is before you can pass it on. So, as we look here in the life of Jacob, he had a blessing that God had given him so that he could then pass that blessing on to his children and grandchildren. What is it that we have? We have the gift of salvation that God has promised each one of us. And what is it that we can do? We can pass that on to others that we know. We can show them salvation and tell them about it. We can pass that blessing on to our children, our grandchildren, our relatives, our friends, other family. But a blessing is still really of no value. To be anything that we pass on is really of no value unless we have something that works. We can only recommend or try to pass on something that we know or have experienced personally. Here's an example. I don't know many tire shops. I know that my father-in-law loves to use Bill Day Tire, and he talks about them, and he's happy with the services they provided, and I'm glad to hear that. But I've never used Bill Day Tire. I've never gone there. I've never had any personal experience with him. But I'll tell you this, if you need a tire changed in White House, I know a really good tire shop right down here called D&M Tire. I send all of my friends and family to him. He's always done every single one of us right. He's helped us out with extra things. He's done all of this stuff. And it doesn't mean that Bill Day Tire isn't good. It doesn't mean that at all. But if I haven't personally experienced it, can I speak with the same conviction and tell you the same personal stories and say, let me tell you about the time I went down there and had a lug nut and the lug nut wouldn't come off, and we tried looking for the lug nut key and some different things and we couldn't ever get it, and they said, oh, we'll just go ahead and drill it off for you, no charge, we won't charge any extra, and they just took care of all right there, and then they went ahead and changed it, and they didn't even really want to charge they didn't want to charge hardly anything, and I gave them some extra for this and I paid them for this, and they didn't want to take anything. I can tell you because that's my personal experience. Jacob's over 130 years old. And what is it he talks about? He talks about what he knows. He talks about how God has walked with him. He's been my shepherd all my life long. He's redeemed me from all evil. What is it he's saying? He's saying God's given him a godly heritage. God had fed him or shepherded him, likely both spiritually and physically as he was taking care of sheep. God had redeemed him from all evil, forgiven him, and changed his life. He had stories to tell. He had experiences. How God had helped him find a wife, prosper in spite of dishonest relatives, protected him from his brother, changed his name, kept his promises, guided his life. God had done so much. He had something that worked. He had experience as he passed that on. And that's what we can do for others. You can tell what God has done for you. Finding God to be faithful, you can then urge others to trust him too. I can't tell you how many different times when I was growing up, I would hear people say, oh, God is faithful. He'll take care of you. He'll do this. He'll do that. Oh, that sounds great. Oh, I'm sure God will. But I hadn't personally experienced that. But I can remember the different times where God, in my own life, has come through and has provided what I needed, when I needed it, on the perfect time schedule. God's hand has been evident in your life. It may be discouraging at times. You may forget the blessings that God has given you and the good things that he has done for you. But if you will take time to stop and think, you too can say, as Jacob said, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day. Like Jacob, tell how God made a difference in your life. The time he answered prayer, the time he kept you, other occasions where he gave you strength and power to continue through a dark valley, specific occasions where God intervened for you. Let the facts be known. Because often, by the time that we think that anybody wants to hear our facts, it's too late. We realize too late that there are details that we would like to know about family members, about occurrences or events, or wanting to know, what is it? Did God do anything for you? Because I've never heard you say anything about it. Did God do anything? And maybe it's too late. Maybe they've had a stroke, they've had a heart attack. You never just got around to it. Don't let trials and experiences that God has given others be lost. Grandparents typically will tell what needs to be known for the moment, and not wanting to be the old fogey and just kind of ramble on, won't bore you with all their stories. But if you will take the time to talk to people that have had experiences in life, they will tell you what God has done for them, when times are hard and how God helped them. And we can do the same. We can tell how God has helped us, lessons we have learned, why they need to know your Savior, how he has made a difference in your life, and how he can do the same for them. But even if you have something to begin with, and even if you have something that really does work, if it's not something desirable, no one will want it. For example, I have seen an old junk car in somebody's front yard that looked to be a very old, fine vehicle. It looked so nice back in the day, but now it looks like just a big bucket of rusted scrap that maybe the wheels are hanging on just because of the spider webs that have been built around there. It's not really something that most people would say, I want to take care of that old rusted bucket of bolts. I know the frame's falling apart and all the tires are coming off, but that looks like something I really want to have. That's not normally the way things go. When somebody has something that's passed down, for it to be valued and treasured, it has to be something that's desirable. It has to be something that other people would want. We can only pass on what is attractive. As Christians, we are guaranteed that there will be bad times, but there are also good times. There are advantages to being a Christian. Are we living our life in such a way that when people hear about us being a Christian, they say, oh, I don't want to be a Christian, because all they do is talk about all the bad things. Yeah, they say God's going to help them, but they are always just so down and so discouraged. That's not something that I want to have. Or are they hearing things like, God filled me with love, he's helped me to love, he's helped me to live a life of love, he's helped me to be temperate and meek and mild, he's helped me to do what's right all the time, he's helped me, he's blessed me, he's been near me. Yeah, I don't have a lot of things, but God has been so good to me. The attractiveness behind that. Live in such a way so that people recognize that serving God is a good thing. It's not something to be bemoaned or complaining. It's a blessing that we have to have a personal relationship with our Savior. It's not just a tradition. It's not just an act that we hold to or a format that we do. It's not something we're required, but it's who we are. It's the most important thing in our life. Jacob believed very clearly that his grandchildren would want to live for God. As it says there in verse 15, he says, well, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day. And then the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys, and in them let my name be carried on, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac. He's making the assumption that God has been with his forefathers, God has been with him, and in the same way that he's done that, continue to walk with them. He's assuming that his children will want to live for God. God had been good to his father, been good to his grandfather. Serving God was a blessing, not a burden, an opportunity, not an obligation. Jacob told how they would be a part of God's people, how they could have God's favor. He explained what a blessing it was to serve God. And this is one of the most important parts of passing a blessing on to someone else. You can demonstrate the attractiveness of salvation. The Bible speaks of the beauty of holiness. And don't get me wrong, there will be down times, there will be difficulties where we'll have to continue one step in the other. We will have to preserve, we'll have to go through difficult times. Look at Jacob. Look at the difficult times he had to go through in his life. He had some serious problems. But yet we see here he still enjoyed serving the Lord. His walk with God made all of the difference. We can see very clearly, and we know for a fact that there were times in Scripture where he was bemoaning his trials. He had some down times. He had some discouraging difficulties. But the Lord still radiated through his life. Life is often a struggle, but the advantage of living for the Lord can always be evident. I think of my grandparents, and I think of my great-grandparents. I didn't know both sides of my great-grandparents, but I do remember my great-grandmother on my dad's side, and I remember her for many years always wanting to pray with me whenever we'd get ready to leave, or different times that we would be there. And even in her older age, how evident her faith was even then. Think of my grandparents. And think of all the difficult times that they've been through. Think of my grandfather and the accident that he had with the tractor, the passing away of my aunt, and different times that I talked to my grandmother. And what is it that she's talking to me? She may be discouraged. There may be some difficult things happening, but she'll always end by saying, but you know what? The Lord's been faithful. He's really been helping me. I was really discouraged, but he's just been encouraging me, and I'm just so excited to be serving the Lord. You can demonstrate the attractiveness of salvation. My grandparents, they're all human just as much as you and I. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't showy, but it was genuine and it was attractive. When we're going through life, we can ask, why would someone want to be a Christian if all they saw was me? If they just saw me and I was the only person they ever interacted with, would anybody else want to be a Christian? Not would they be a Christian, but would they want to be a Christian? What difference does it make? What attraction does it hold? You and I can show what living for God really means. Your life can point others to Christ far better than the best sermon that anyone could ever preach. Your family can want what you have. There was a story my dad told one time about his great-grandfather. They were at the church. They had been working around doing some different things, replacing windows, cutting the grass. There was a cracked window pane. They didn't have this double-sided vacuum-sealed stuff where you can't just run down to the store and get a piece and fix it. They were doing all those kind of things. And at one point, my dad, he was 14, and my great-grandfather said, hey, I need you to run down the store here. I need you to buy some plexiglass. We're just going to use that because it will work for what we've got right now until we can get a piece of glass that's in the exact size. So he got the money. At that time, I remember it being, it's like it was going to be right at $1 with some tax and some different things. And so he got his dollar, went down there, and at the store, since the guy knew who he was, small town, said, well, I'm not going to charge any tax because you're a church. And so they went back, they replaced the window, they were taking care of different things, taking care of the Sunday school literature. My great-grandfather was the Sunday school superintendent at that time, so he was working on all the literature and getting it all sorted out and all the different things. And he was placing it in the pulpit, and he looked over at my dad. My dad was 14, and he looked at him, and he said, Bobby? Because a lot of people called my dad Bobby when he was younger and transitioned to Bob when he was older. Said, Bobby, someday I want you to do this. And my dad would always, not necessarily just cry, but start to get a little teary-eyed when he would get to this part of the story. And he says, I never did end up becoming a Sunday school superintendent. He said, that never was my calling in life. He said, instead, I became a pastor and a preacher. And he says, I think that my great-grandfather was pretty happy with that. My great-grandfather, his grandfather, was pretty happy with that decision. And he actually ended up being able to pastor the church where my great-grandparents went to church for about 6 years before he had passed away. And it was just one of those short little statements, and it just said, hey, I want you to do this when you grow up. I want you to be doing this someday. And it made such a lasting impact in my dad, just that comment, that helping out, working in the church, that he said, I want you to be doing something for the kingdom that matters. A little statement, but you never know what it is that will impact a child, a grandchild, a great-grandchild, a friend, a family member, but you will impact them. You'll either impact them for the kingdom or against the kingdom. Let's live our lives in such a way that we impact them positively. The overflow of having something that is real. How many times have you been carrying a cup and you filled it too full and you're walking along and you spill a little bit? It normally happens more with children or when you're younger. Not to say that it's only for them, but I remember different times I do that and I'd think, oh, it's okay. I'm just sharing with everybody along the way. But that's the way salvation works. We need to be so full of God, so full of the Holy Spirit, that when we live our life, when we go on our day, that we have that overflow of something that is real. We need to follow Jesus, be filled with the Spirit, commune with God, and live a genuine life. And be reminded that you, no matter your age, no matter how young you are, how old you are, you can have a blessing to pass on to others. Let's stand and pray that the Lord will help us to keep this thought in mind as we go throughout the week.